Welcome back to Talk of the Town on 99.7, 1450 WHTC and WHTC.com.
And we welcome you back to Talk of the Town for this Monday, February 22nd. I'm Gary Stevens. Fourth Monday of the month. This time we normally chat with one of the three men who represent Ottawa County in the State House. He is second-term Republican Representative Brad Slagh of R-Zeeland Township. He joins us via the Zoom connection. Brad, good morning and welcome back to WHTC. Go ahead and hit the
unmute button. It's
unmute button, and we're all set.
Remember, yes, exactly.
Yes. Brad, good morning.
Thanks, Gary. Welcome. Glad to be here this morning.
Glad you are with us via the Zoom connection. If you wish to chat with us over the phone, all you listeners, you can do so at 395-1450, 395-1450. It's been a couple of weeks since the governor has presented her budget proposal via the state budget director. Some of the things she would like to see. It's ambitious, I think is a good way of putting it. Is it practical, or is it a case of, well, that's her wish list, but what the reality is going to be something entirely different?
Well, I don't know that it's going to be entirely different from that, Gary. I think the big picture, let's start from the big picture and then we can work our way down if we want to. Big picture is this year that we're in right now, we've got a $61 billion budget for the state of Michigan, 61 billion with a B. And there are additional dollars from that are coming in, revenue dollars that we believe truly will be there. So the governor is intending to spend it all, the $66 billion. So adding another $5 billion roughly to that amount that she's spending this year into programs and things which would only be 1 year, but many of those will set up somebody saying, well, we hired staff for this 1 year, now we got to keep them. So they're going to want to be able to continue on with that kind of a budget. So are we going to grow the budget, or are we going to use it truly for like one-time things? Like let's fix bridges with it, or other kinds of things that we can do with one-time dollars.
Now, the question does bring up the fact that there are needs that the state has that needs to be taken care of. But question then becomes, Brad, who's going to pay for it? And, you just can't just have money magically coming from Washington to be able to pay for some of the ambitious things that the administration would like to do.
Yeah, and magic money was an interesting phraseology. I kind of like that. I might have to put that into my repertoire if I can borrow it from you. The interesting thing is that the federal government is planning on giving us way more money than we've had. I mean, if you look at our budget this year, we were expecting to be almost $2 billion behind by the time we got to the end of this fiscal year. They're now saying we're going to be $1 billion ahead. It's all federal stimulus money, unemployment money, those kinds of things that are going to be there. So we believe that there is going to be some money, but what are we using it for, and how do we best put that into a place where we're not anticipating that money the year after, because we're not anticipating that money the year after. How do we budget rightly so that we're doing this wisely?
And the other point is the fact that, federal stimulus money is nice. It takes care of the immediate need, but eventually the bill's going to be coming due, and the constituents, you and I are among them as well, Brad. We're going to have to, pony up the money for it some way, somehow, be it, directly via taxes or indirectly with a higher cost of living. We're going to have to pay the freight for this, and it's going to affect the state budgets as well as the national and local budgets as well.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And, at one point in time when I was a township supervisor, just as a comparison, this is on a little microcosm comparison, I had one of my residents say, Brad, we're talking about more bike paths. Now, I like bike paths. I like to be on them. But every time you accept state dollars, to extend bike paths, somebody's got to pay for that. Where's it? It's my tax money that's going to go on into that bike path. So it's the same kind of thing. This is just on a much broader scale. It's federal dollars, but it's coming out of our pockets over time.
As I said, either directly via taxes or indirectly with a higher cost of living, because if you try to tax corporations, the big shots and stuff like that, they're going to just pass on that cost in the bottom line for goods and services, and we're going to have to pay it anyway. So
that's exactly true.
Yeah, it's anyway, but that's philosophical differences between the two parties, and that's not going to resolve itself anytime soon, and definitely not going to resolve itself in the last 18 and a half minutes we have of the segment with Brad Slagh. 395-1450, 395-1450. Your office sent a couple of notices since the last time we chatted about things that you are involved with. One is a plan that would force the state of Michigan to review ballot petitions within a reasonable time frame. Tell us about your plan. Why is it necessary? And frankly, can it work?
Yeah. So, the interesting thing is when we collect signatures for a ballot change, we did it as just a couple examples. Right to Life just recently did one. There's one for the Unlock Michigan that we did last year, turned in. Just before that, a year before that or so, was the marijuana to be able to go recreational. Those are all signature petition drives, and then they get turned in. And right now, there's no law that requires the Secretary of State to have it done within a certain time frame, so that it can take as long as the Secretary of State wants it to at this point in time. Those petition signature drives have really specific timelines that they have to get their signatures in. So they have to do it within 90 days, a certain number of signatures within that amount of time. And I think that it's just justifiable to say, well, if there has to be those kind of requirements for the people collecting the signatures, there really ought to be that kind of requirement for timeline requirement for those people that have to review those signatures and actually certify whether they got them or didn't.
It's almost as if the Secretary of State, no matter who's in office, what party it is, has a pocket veto, can be able to, set their own agenda just by sitting on their hands and doing nothing.
That is exactly correct. And it's why I think this makes sense. It's interesting. Obviously, whenever you send something out, you get feedback, right? Especially through the Facebook loop, that kind of thing. My feedback through that Facebook thing was interesting. I had people who were obviously left-leaning get a hold of me and say, this actually makes sense. What you're doing actually makes sense. I don't like it that you're doing it because of the Unlock Michigan petition that's sitting there. It hasn't been answered when we turned it in October. And I had people on the far right going, this makes perfect sense. We need to do this. So I think I'm in the right ballpark when everybody's kind of agreeing that it actually makes sense.
It makes sense. Unfortunately, there are those who are saying, hey, I like having this power. I don't want to give it up. And they could put the kibosh on it if you don't get enough on both sides of the aisle to be able to not only pass this legislation, but also to overcome any probable, and I'm going to say the word probable, gubernatorial veto of this.
Agreed. And I think it's likely that it will get vetoed, but we'll see what kind of, I think it does make sense, and we'll see what kind of response we get from the legislators.
395-1450, 395-1450. If you have a question for State House Representative Brad Slagh of R-Zeeland Township, his district basically includes part of Holland as well as part of Hudsonville, Zeeland as well. And as I mentioned, one of the three men who represent Ottawa County in the State House, along with Luke Meerman, who will be joining us next week, and Jim Lilly. One other piece of legislation since last we chatted with you, Brad Slagh, is dealing with something, and I think we've talked about this before. It sounds familiar. Updating a method to setting speed limits. I have a funny feeling this is something that has been brought up before, didn't clear the legislature or the governor's desk in time, and you're bringing it back up.
Yep. It actually passed the House last year, did not pass through the Senate. So we are bringing it back up. I think it still is a valuable piece of legislation. It's set, instead of having to use two sets of data, a speed study and an engineering study to set a road speed, it would enable us to use just one of those pieces. You could use more than that, but it will only require one. Obviously, that's a savings in time, money, those kinds of things. I think that makes sense for us. And because it allows for that engineering study to go along, it actually could reduce some of the, it could, if necessary, reduce speeds in a specific zone around a church, a school, some of those kinds of things, but it would be really tightly managed. So I don't really expect speeds to be changed much. The other thing that it does is you can round up or down so within 5 miles an hour, where right now you have to round up, and it puts you over the 85th percentile, which is what the recommended speed is naturally or nationally, is 85th percentile of the traffic flowing.
Now, I don't think we have much of a problem here along the lakeshore as the stereotypical communities would be in other parts of the country where local jurisdictions artificially drive down the speed limit in order to increase the revenues for tickets for speeders. Some say that stereotype lends itself to having maybe the state or the county make the decision and not the local municipalities, to prevent those municipalities from having speed limits as a money generator than actually as a safety deal.
Yeah, I just, Gary, have not seen that here in our communities. And for the state of Michigan, really, it's the state police and the road commission that are probably the two drivers for speed studies and whether they actually get done or not. We truly believe that we've got folks that are more responsible than that in our government, in our communities, and so we're not having to deal with that really at all. It's really about setting wise speed limits. That's really all we're trying to do.
Brad, a couple of things that MERS News picked up on over the weekend. Just want to get your thoughts on that. According to the State House Minority Leader, Donna Lisinski, an Ann Arbor Democrat, lawmakers can and should be required to wear masks in her situation, the House floor during this COVID-19 situation. Where do you stand on the mask situation? Should you have to wear a mask while you are conducting business on the floor of the State House?
It's a good question. And I guess, Gary, for Brad Slagh, I'm not convinced that masks will make a huge difference. I do believe they can make a difference. I don't know that they make a huge difference. So I try and regularly wear mine because I know that other people around me are uncomfortable without it. So that I believe it's part of what I should be doing. And I think we all should be really careful about how we interact with each other and how we try and keep distance. And I think the distance piece is probably more important to me than the mask itself. But I understand her concern, and so when I'm with her and other folks who have a concern about it, I try and wear mine.
395-1450. Good morning. You're on the line with State Representative Brad Slagh.
Yeah, I think that if you can't even get on board with wearing masks on the floor, even as a sign of it's the right thing to do to encourage people to keep people doing things in the right manner so we can get past this and through it and finally get back to a normal life, that's super disappointing, because you must not be listening to any of the news that's been said today. It's possible it's recommended you might be able to recommend to wear masks into 2022 to be safe. So it's like that you think that you're immune from that as a Republican on the floor in Michigan, just so you can basically appeal to the base, I think is just silly. It's just silly. It's like saying you don't want to wear a seatbelt because you're afraid of your liberties being taken away. So that was a disappointing answer, Mr. Slagh.
All right, appreciate the call. Brad, your response?
And I definitely understand his concern. And it isn't that I'm trying to play to my base. That isn't that isn't really why I'm doing it. My thing is, it's the health side of it. I believe it has value. It's not the thing that seems to have the most value just across the board.
Good morning. You're on the line with State Representative Brad Slagh.
First of all, belated one-day birthday to Mr. Slagh, and thank you for what you do for this area. Appreciate it. And I totally agree with them. A lot of it, people are so doggone scared because they don't have any faith. For one thing, that our lives are in God's hands, and to watch Joe Biden have 2 masks on the weekend is laughable. Thanks.
Appreciate the call. 395-1450, 395-1450. There's another story from MERS. I'll just give you the headline, and then, if you want to amplify or if you need me to do more on that, I will. But it is basically a debate about how this outbreak should be regulated. Governor Whitmer and the administration believes that the executive office should have the authority to make COVID decisions. But according to MERS News, the legislative Republicans assert that those decisions would be better made at the local level through a regional approach. Both, to be honest with you, Brad, both arguments have good merit to it.
Absolutely. I think especially if we look at the very beginning of this pandemic, let's just roll back the year back to the March. I think our governor did a great job at the very beginning of this, saying we need to put in some halts and stop action. We need to do whatever we can to try and figure out what's going on and be wise about that. I think she did a great job. And it needs to have that kind of thing in a pandemic, in some sort of emergency. We need to have a centralized authority because it's got to happen. As we move forward from that, it makes sense for us to be able to do things community-wide rather than having to do it in an entirety of a state. We don't zone for the entire state from one place. We zone from each community. I think much of handling emergencies needs to be done that way. We don't handle everything the same way that you do where you have a flood, a dam break. You don't legislate to every part of the state that there's you might have to have curfews or other kinds of things just based on what's going on. I think it's wise to use local resources, local people who are experts, and try and do that. As time moves on, you need to move more and more local.
Yeah, I think more than anything else, the biggest complaint that we have been getting about how this has been handled over the last 12 months, and it'll be 12 months on March the 10th, is the fact that many people feel they are not getting a say in the process. It's almost as if we are being told what to do by a central authority that says, well, I represent all 10 million of Michigan residents, but not all 10 million feel that their voices are being heard or that they have a part in the process. They're just almost as if they're being heard as if they are cattle.
Yeah, and we definitely hear that. My concern is that we'll never get down to the individual level in every case, but I think we can do it for school districts. I think schools can choose. I think communities can choose. We need to move in that direction. As time goes on, you need to move further and further away from a centralized power and more toward regionalization.
One final point, and I'm going to sort of round our discussion and go back to where we started. We talked at the beginning of our discussion, Brad Slagh, about the budget process and the budget presentation made earlier this month by the Whitmer administration. Do you get a sense, granted we're only talking on February 22nd, do you get a sense that there will be a little bit more of a working with the administration on a budget for 2022, certainly more than the 2020 budget or the 2021 budget?
Yeah, I think there will be. Part of it is there's a need for both sides to move. First of all, we've got federal monies that have to be allocated within a certain time frame to be able to be used. We're definitely going to want to make that happen. I think the other side of it is there's an election coming up in 2022 that everybody needs to make sure, both the governor and the legislators need to make sure that there's an ability to have legislation done, have budgets done so that they can move forward on other things. So yeah, I think there will be more effort to try and make that happen.
State Representative Brad Slagh joins us the fourth Monday of the month to share his thoughts about what's going on in Lansing with us. Brad, thank you very much for joining us this morning on Talk of the Town. Wish you and everyone in your family and also in the district well over the next 4 weeks or so. And we'll do this again in March.
Great deal. And thanks for having me on, Gary. Appreciate it much.
Thank you very much, Brad Slagh, 99.7 and 1450 WHTC.